Good morning. I would now like to call to order the June 7th, 2023 meeting of the State Board of Education. Roll call, please.
Mr. Bess.
Here.
Ms. DeLosa.
Here.
Mr. Durham.
Present.
Dr. Ernest.
Present.
Mr. Gastineau.
Here.
Ms. Hemmel.
Present.
Mr. Mapes.
Here.
Ms. Moat.
Here.
Ms. Rensselaer. I see her on.
She might be muted.
There she is.
Oh, she said here. Okay.
Mr. Watts.
Here.
Dr. Jenner.
Here.
Thank you. We have
Let's
everybody in
please
attendance.
stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Motion second, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from May 10th, 2023 meeting?
So moved. Second.
The motion and a second, any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Motion carries. So a few quick updates this morning. Good morning to those of you in the audience today and also those of you online. Thank you very much for joining us. First of all, at this time, most of our schools have wrapped up. I have met with over 200 superintendents in the past 2 weeks, and I think of those, maybe only one of them is going towards the end of June. The rest of our schools are officially out. On behalf of the board, we just want to thank all of our educators, all of our staff members, all of the people who have made it such a great school year. We sure appreciate all you do for our students. We also want to congratulate the class of 2023 and wish them the best as they pursue their next step to employment, enrollment, or enlistment leading to service. Over the summer, a lot of times people think that our schools and our educators and everything shuts down completely. Those of you who are educators know that that's not actually the case. We have many, many opportunities for summer learning for students, as well as summer learning for our educators. A couple that I'll highlight real quick include like the summer of e-learning we have all over the state of Indiana going on. We also have Indiana Literacy Cadre kicking off with a large number of schools this summer who will get their training and prep for next school year. This Friday, June 9th, please keep an eye out for legislative session guidance. We already put out as a department some curricular material guidance because that was timely and very needed. But we have a significant amount of law that was passed, some of which the board will act on today. And with that law comes a lot of guidance that team members are preparing. With the guidance also, when we build that out, we always have implementation, best possible implementation for schools and ultimately kids in mind. So many of you have been involved in stakeholder conversations to make sure the guidance is the best we can get it. We also have been doing, and we kicked this off officially as a board in May on rethinking high school and the discussion there with the diploma requirements. Of course, as a board, we started those calls in March. The General Assembly was going at that time as well, then also passed 1001, 1002. We've talked about that a little bit. Since the May board meeting, we've kicked off the next round of discussion, which includes calls with individual board members to seek feedback, discussion, and then calls with additional stakeholder groups. So if you are on one of those calls upcoming on the stakeholder groups, thank you. And if you're interested, please let us know so that we can make sure to hear your feedback. Looking ahead as a board, we plan to have a work session in September. We are hoping to have some key national experts to join us for that work session. And again, the focus will be on rethinking high school. The date and the details are forthcoming. We also today have a resolution that Jason Callahan will present that is really going to connect the standards alignment work and the rethinking high school work. As a board, the General Assembly has really delegated a lot of opportunity for us to make things better, to improve good work for kids. And so we have a few balls that are going down the court right now, and that resolution is simply a signal to connect some of those dots. Also in July, we will have an update from the National Center for Assessment, which we've done this will be the third summer we've done that, and that's where they report on, of course, the impact we had from COVID, the significant drops that we saw, and then where we are today in terms of the growth and proficiency by all student populations. So that will still be on track in July. And then in August is when we will do the iRead update. The reason iRead, I know we're all anxious to always see iRead. The reason that that's not in July is because that window stays open for schools to retest until mid-July. So that comes in August. Today we'll be hearing from Jake Caressel, our Director of Teaching and Learning, here to tell us about Indiana's future-focused academic standards. We'll also hear from Lynn Schemmel, our Director of Assessment, here to tell us about and just start the discussion on assessment in the future. Before kicking off to consent agenda, I would like to walk the board through the process of the standards redesign. Following the 2022 session, which is when those laws went into place, we immediately got to work. The first step was a bill, for those of you who follow in the 22 session, called HB 1251, which required us to update Indiana's academic standards to align with key skills and traits necessary for students to be successful after high school graduation. Immediately, the comprehensive research effort was kicked off and done to identify skills and traits needed for students' lifelong success, including a focus on knowledge and skill development. Focus groups for this included educators, parents, business leaders, higher education, workforce development leaders, military personnel, industry leaders, or industry organizations. We presented that update to the board in the fall about the results of that independent research analysis aligned with skills and traits of the Indiana Graduates Prepared to Succeed characteristics. Also, in the fall of 2022, we shared broadly, as much as we could, a public interest form for any educator, and then a separate form for any community member and family that would be interested in serving as a part of our process. That was press released November 3rd, numerous communications on social media, obviously in the weekly newsletter. At the time when we presented that presentation, if you go back to November, we had said that our goal is to bring this back to the board in June. So here we are with that work and many stakeholder hours, and that work is ready today. Little did we know at that time that the General Assembly would kick up that deadline we have to affirm it as a board by July 1 of 2023. That was brand new in statute this year. So right after that, in late 2022, the next step began. Content experts considered a variety of characteristics in their initial review of standards, including alignment with essential skills and traits found in that study. And by the way, that study is a public report. You're welcome to it if anyone wants to dig deeper into that. Depth of knowledge, grade level appropriateness, and then also vertical articulation. Based on this review, our team then presented to stakeholder committees a starting point for prioritizing and identifying essential standards. The task at hand of what we'll share with you today was required by statute, and I have that code if interested, And it required us to reduce existing standards by at least 25%. And then of that amount, to define not more than 33% of the standards as essential. That is what the law states. So thank you to all the stakeholder committees, about 200 people comprised of educators, administrators, parents, and higher education faculty who convened in February to discuss and provide initial feedback and review on the prioritized and essential standards, including consideration for whether the standards were a reasonable expectation for grade level or course, and whether the standards should be considered essential for mastery by the end of that grade level or course. After the February meetings, our content teams reviewed the feedback and the recommendations from the stakeholder committees to refine the proposed standards and to release for a public comment period. Excuse me, you probably also remember that. I shared that with you a couple different board meetings. We had a series of public comments, windows open, ready to accept your comments, and boy, did we have them. We had a few hundred comments and suggestions from our public, so thank you. Once the public review period ended, the content teams reviewed, synthesized the feedback provided through the public comment period in order to present actionable feedback to the stakeholder committees yet again for consideration in further refining the proposed prioritized standards. So then the stakeholder committee meetings reconvened in April to consider the public feedback, determine any recommended adjustments to be made to propose prioritized standards based on the actionable public feedback. Then throughout late April and early May, our team members compiled all the feedback from all the stages of the review process and conducted the final content and editorial reviews to create final proposed standards documents for today. That's a lot, I know. I wanted to say that because you all, this was nothing short of an all hands on deck. All hands on deck. Yes, the department, yes, many stakeholders, many public comments. I had multiple meetings with legislators to brief them, since this is the law that we are charged to move forward. So I cannot thank you enough. In addition to the new 2023 legislative session statutory requirements to approve the new standards by July 1 of 2023, we are also starting to get questions on assessment. That's natural with our teachers and our administrators, and what happens to assessment. So statute IC 2031-31 also requires us to undertake a realignment of iLearn, reflecting the standard streamlining and reduction. That is to be completed not later than March 2025, which is why we will kick off that discussion as a board today. So today we are only voting on the streamlined standards. Just to be very clear, we're only voting on the streamlined standards, and then we have a resolution that just connects all the statutes. Other than that, the assessment is just for discussion and hearing thoughts. And then, of course, that assessment, we have a legal process that we have to connect with our TAC, which are external experts from all over the country who focus on standards and assessment alignment, and those meetings are forthcoming yet this month as well. Across the board, we were able to achieve reductions beyond the 25% across the board requirement. Kindergarten, 35% reduction, and I'm reading off math, ELA, and social studies. Grade 1, 32%, grade 2, 34%, grade 3, 32%, grade 4, 34%, grade 5, 35%, grade 6, 30%, grade 7, 29%, grade 8, 28%, high school, 29%. And just as a reminder, we passed science standards, understanding the law, last year, so that was already taken care of. So on that note, just a quick, again, I wanted to give you that quick summary update. Of course, Jake and Lynn will come up and share some more, but wanted to give you that update. And then I will now open it up for any board comments.
I think that the information you provided, that synopsis is amazing. It shows all of the hard work that everyone has put into the streamlining of those standards, and I believe that it will allow our teachers to be more efficient in their teaching as well.
Thank you, William. Any other?
Just, my buddy here to my right is retiring in 3 days. I've had the privilege to be with him around colleagues and former students, and I see the way they look at him, they talk about him, so a job well done. I hope that one person speaks as highly of me when I'm done with this as every one that I encounter talks about him, so.
To your
just wanna
retirement.
recognize-
Congratulations. Thank you, BJ.
Yep.
Any other comments, or we'll move to public comment? So for public comment, let's go ahead and have, we have two today. Steve Baker.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Steve Baker, principal, Bluffton High School. I just finished my 24th year there as a high school principal, 38 years in education. Also serve on the ISP Executive Board with Dr. Bess, which is an honor. There are many points to make today, so I'm going to streamline my comments about the proposed streamline standards.
We're laughing.
Nothing.
We're laughing inside.
Nothing. No joke. All right, just
We
skip.
are.
I'll mark that off. I won't
Yeah,
use that one
yeah.
again. I won't use that. First of all, as always, it was a good process. We appreciate the public comment, which we have time and can always use that. We've come to expect that from this Department of Education. Always appreciate the opportunity to give input if needed. As I was looking back over my 38 years, we've gone from, if anybody remembers this, proficiencies, standards, Indiana Common Core, Common Core in general. We've had essential standards, priority standards, core standards, and power standards. What we've always wanted and needed are streamlined standards. So we're very thankful that this opportunity has come. We've been wrestling with the myriad of standards that sometimes can be a mile wide and an inch deep. And this enormity of standards has overwhelmed my teachers and forced at Bluffton High School to guess which ones are the most important and which ones we have to eliminate, because not all standards presently, I'll admit it, if I go to master jail, not all standards presently can be mastered in their current form. So I know, why should we believe Steve Baker? It's a good question and a valid one. So I asked some of my superstars at Bluffton High School what they thought about the streamlined standards, how they thought it would impact teaching and learning at BHS. I know it's hard to believe, but I could not get any of them to get up before the crack of dawn, spend 4 hours round trip in a car with me during summer break. So I asked them for their comments. Here are their comments from some of my best. The first one's from an English teacher, 23-year veteran, teaches English that whole time, and one of my superstars. She said, "The streamlined standards are more straightforward and allow for teachers not to get lost in the weeds. I love the quick reference pages for both reading and writing. They're much less repetitive and laser focused on what teachers need to know and implement while maintaining rigor. This will make our jobs easier." And the other one I'll share with you is from Tara Kokenauer. Many of you know her, current Indiana Teacher of the Year, who also served on the Social Studies Standards Committee in 2014. Here's what she said: "The streamlined standards are, to me, simplified for teacher and community accessibility, but they are not a reduction in content knowledge, expectations, or rigor. In my experience teaching 7th grade, 8th grade social studies, as well as world history, U.S. history, and AP world history, these streamlined standards ease the development of vertical articulation and skill development for students pursuing college, careers, or enlistment. They also embed civics education, economics, geography, historical thinking skills, and empathy to guide instruction toward the whole student." So in summary, Bluffton High School is eager and ready for these standards, these streamlined standards. We need them in our hands ASAP because we're gonna need to start working on them. We're gonna need some PD. Time for us is of the essence, and I hope that you will approve them today. Thank you. Appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Steve.
Yep.
Next, we have Kendra Johnson.
Good morning to each and every one of you.
Good morning.
When I appeared before you last time, I was proud grandma because I had 2 grandchildren being promoted. One was being promoted from kindergarten, and the other one was being promoted from elementary school. Well, update. The whole brood, as I call them, have moved down here to Indianapolis. So my daughter, her husband, and their 5 children are now here. She's extremely excited. She had already looked for a particular high school for her oldest son. She cannot believe it that in 2 years he will be graduating. And it just goes to show you how fast time goes. So now, and then also congratulations to my cousin Ivy, who graduated from Westside Leadership Academy in Gary, Indiana. So with that being said, congratulations to all students that made the honor roll, that graduated, that made gains and survived another year of school. So let's hope and pray that their upcoming year will be just as successful or even more so. Which brings me to this point. It's summer. And a lot of times when the children are out, the education goes right out the window, everything they've learned. And many times the teachers have to spend time when the kids return with remediation. So one of the things I'm advising parents to do is to spend the summer showing kids how to be involved in learning without it being a burden. And, you know, there are a lot of ways to do that. You can take them to the store, give them a $10 bill, and say, okay, what can I buy with this? That's adding, subtracting. You can take them, Lake County has Indiana Dunes. We have a lot of different sites here. Get them involved in the arts. We have different festivals here. Constantly keep them involved, constantly keep them interested, constantly keep them motivated. So that way when they come back in the fall, they're more interested in learning more about what they saw and experienced during the summer and the educational applications of it. As I stated before, I am planning to go to Gary, Indiana. I heard that the Boys and Girls Club is having a fest up there, and it is my intention to have a table there to talk with parents, to get their input and find out what they would like to know more about when it comes to education. And one of the things I'm going to ask them is, do you all know that we have an Indiana State Board of Education? And I want to see how that conversation goes and how they could watch the meetings or what the purpose is. And I guarantee you, when I do that, I will be more than happy to come back and let you know what their feedback was concerning that, because it's all about education and what we can do to help our parents, help our children to succeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next comment is from Dr. Michaela Spangenberg.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So my name is Dr. Michaela Spangenberg. I facilitate an action initiative called the Gary Education Coalition, which is focused on bringing quality education back to Gary, Indiana, which used to be kind of a world center of quality education. And we continue to be committed to bringing a democratically elected school board back to our city, restoring the civil rights of our taxpayers and the fiscal and academic health of our schools. We also recognize that in order to do that we need the best people possible on this transitional board that will be appointed in July, and that will, take on more than an advisory role sometime in the future, hopefully next year. And because of that, very, very many people in our community have been very motivated to apply for this board. I know of at least a dozen people who have already applied or plan to apply, and we plan to promote, those in our community who are highly qualified and who are singularly focused on the success of our students in our community in those roles. I mean, I've looked at some of the people who either have applied or are in the process of applying, and, the years in education, I'm sure cumulatively are like in the hundreds or something, and we even have young people applying. So it's not just people who have been in the process forever, but other people as well, people who have experience in secondary education, people who have managed school corporations and dozens of schools, and people who have a lot of experience in finance and law, and I think that's important as well. So I'm very hopeful that, you've been very gracious to us when we've come down here. I know I've spoken with you before, Dr. Jenner, and you've always offered to be helpful to our community, and I think the best way to be helpful is by selecting candidates that are from our community and really have the knowledge and experience to do the best they can in helping us get back to a place where we no longer have a takeover in any way, shape, or form, so that other school corporations in the state of Indiana can see, okay, if you become financially distressed, it's not the end of the world. Like, your school corporation one day can be healthy again, it can, have a normal school board again, things of that nature. And I think that's very important, because I think even when things happen in Gary, Indiana, there's other communities, that are in similar financial situations that look to us and say, well, what's going to happen there? So thank you so much. I appreciate you letting me speak today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Spangenberg. And that is a decision point I take very, very seriously. The General Assembly charged me with appointing 3 members to the Gary School Board. The mayor will have 1, the city council will have 1. I have personally interviewed people. I have traveled to Gary. I've had team members on numerous phone calls with a variety of people in Gary. It matters deeply who is on your local board, state board. It matters, and that commitment that I will give to Gary is I will give it everything I have to get the best 3 people possible to serve. Thank you for being here today. Next, we have the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second. With a motion and a second, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, we're on to new business, so I'll invite Jake Caressel to come on up. And again, the first thing that we're going to do is only streamline standards. So we won't get into the assessment discussion, because I don't want to confuse everyone that that's a decision point today. It's only streamlined standards, of which we are required to approve by July 1, 2023. Jake.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm happy to be here with all of you to share updates related to the recent streamlining process of the Indiana academic standards, as well as share some information about some parallel and dependent efforts that will aid in charting a path forward that is future-focused and aligns with key initiatives underway to bring high-quality learning experiences to Hoosier students. As Dr. Jenner shared in her opening remarks, you might recall that House Enrolled Act 1251 from the 2022 legislative session called for a research effort to define key traits and skills necessary for success after high school. And the multiple layers of that research effort resulted in the identification of 8 skills and traits. Alignment between the skills and traits identified and other areas such as Indiana GPS, Indiana academic standards, and employability skills are present. And these skills and traits were subsequently also used as a lens for the streamlining of the Indiana academic standards, including the identification of essential standards. Just to level set on the intention of the Indiana academic standards, they are designed to identify what students need to know and be able to do by the end of each grade level or course. The Indiana academic standards are not necessarily exhaustive and may not include everything that a student experiences in their classroom, but they do aim to define minimum expectations and create some level of consistency across schools and corporations. Standards that were considered as part of the streamlining process include key areas of K-12 English language arts, mathematics, social studies, and science, including computer science. The streamlining process began with reviewing the Indiana academic standards in the 4 core content areas as identified in the previous slide. This occurred through examination of the standards in relationship to a variety of criteria, including the key skills and traits identified in the mentioned study, and as well as through engagement with a variety of stakeholders and an open public comment period. So pursuant to Indiana Code 2031-31, this process aimed to streamline the Indiana academic standards by 25% and identify a third of those remaining standards as essential. Alongside the standard streamlining process are 4 key efforts that have been occurring either in parallel or dependent upon this particular effort. And the first 3 are also brought forward for your consideration today, and the 4th will begin following the current approval process. Health, physical education, and fine arts standards went through their regular 6-year review cycle over the last year. Those standards also aim to define what students should know and be able to do in those particular areas at corresponding grade levels and courses. And a committee review process and public comment period were conducted for those standards as well. Also under development this year and undergoing a committee review process and a public comment period is Indiana's proposed first set of integrated STEM standards. These standards are intended to be embedded across content areas in order to create high-quality integrated STEM learning experiences for all students. These standards will help to create a consistent definition and framework around integrated STEM education, as well as encourage collaboration to facilitate the integration of content and provide concrete opportunities to better understand and measure growth and progress in integrated STEM. Historically, early learning foundations were reviewed in Indiana. The team would like to offer the results of the most recent review process in the form of early learning standards. These standards define expectations for what children should know and be able to do prior to kindergarten in order to facilitate shared understanding of these expectations across persons caring for young children. Additionally, early learning standards aim to promote high-quality early education programming for all children. Early learning standards are one of the key building blocks to ensure high-quality programming across the wide variety of programs that serve young children before they enter kindergarten. And a final and perhaps overarching impetus for the development of early learning standards is the desire to improve child outcomes in early care and education programs. Following the adoption of streamlined standards, Indiana's content connectors will also need to be updated accordingly. Content connectors are designed to measure the knowledge and skills of students with significant cognitive disabilities and are assessed on the state's alternate assessment. The team is working to ensure that a plan is in place to begin this body of work this fall and hope to present proposed content connectors to the board for approval in spring of 2024. In terms of our timeline and next steps, today is, of course, a critical juncture, a critical point that will launch into a period of resource development and dissemination and support in the form of professional development opportunities. In the coming weeks and months, our team plans to update important resources and other documentation to support implementation of streamlined academic standards in schools. This slide shows an example of one of the updated standards documents. You'll notice that new documents reflect all of the prioritized standards that were confirmed through the review process and public comment period, and all standards that have been designated as essential are signified generally through gray shading and an E at the end of them. And finally, extensive planning around professional development and other supports is currently underway. Specifically, the team is working with the Education Service Centers of Indiana to host 5 regional in-person summits and 1 virtual synchronous summit, with sessions providing key information, experiences, and resources to support standards updates and their implementation in classrooms. Additionally, a series of hybrid events are being planned that complement the in-person summits and will be offered throughout the school year. And there is also a suite of asynchronous learning opportunities, again, designed to complement the summits and the hybrid events that are intended to either be consumed perhaps individually by educators to continue their growth and development, or in some type of collaborative environment, such as a PLC within a school building. So that concludes my slides. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jake. I will now entertain a motion to approve the streamlined standards, followed by a second. We'll open it up for questions and discussion.
I move to approve the streamlined standards as presented.
Second. With a motion and a second, we'll now open it up for discussion or questions.
Well, I'll kick off, so I'll reiterate the thanks Dr. Jenner had to everybody that was involved, because I think it's a massive effort looking at all of this content across all the grade levels. Frankly, I wish the reduction wasn't 25%. I wish it was 75%, but that's just me. But I think it's a good start, right? I think that's, you know, it's certainly not perfect. And I'm sure there are people out there who would argue that this standard should have stayed, this one should have gone, this should be essential. And reality is that those arguments can happen forever. But this is better than where we were. I think, to quote one of my bosses, who's now no longer my boss, and that is, don't let perfect stand in the way of good, right? So I think it's that idea that we've made progress, we're moving forward with this. I do think time is of the essence in this, in that, again, if you look at the timeline of the professional development, and again, to Mr. Baker's point, I mean, people are anxious to be able to move forward with this, and I think this is the right time. Again, it's not perfect, but moving forward gives us a chance to really kind of fully implement this. And I think when we talk about our teachers across the state, giving them more freedom within their classrooms to teach in the way they feel is the best way to teach, and not to have 1,000 things to try to cover and check off, is incredibly important. And I know we're not talking about assessment, but those two are so inexplicably linked that looking at our assessment in the light of this is incredibly important, because otherwise it becomes an exercise in futility of, hey, you don't have all these standards anymore, but oh, by the way, you're still expected to cover all this stuff. So I think the work has been good. I don't think it's done. I think we'll continue to iterate on this as we go forward, and I hope that we continue to streamline and streamline and streamline to really get to the essence of what are the most important things that our students leave high school with, leave 8th grade with, leave 3rd grade with. What are the most important things that will enable them to be successful? And it's not certainly the comprehensive standards that we streamline. I also don't think it's the entirety of what we've streamlined. Mm-hmm. I think there's at least another step in there, but this is a great step in the right direction. So fully supported. Again, a huge thanks to all the people and the stakeholders who took part in it.
Thank you, Scott. Any other comments, BJ?
If I could, I would just ditto, Scott. I think you said that is perfectly, as I was making notes, you hit every single point. Understand what undertaking this was and appreciate the fact that you've spent 12 months putting this together. Really, really happy with where we landed. Again, maybe the minority, but I'm with Scott. I wanna see 75%. But we're always in a continuous plan of improvement around here, and that is, I love the fact that this is really good, but hopefully all understand that work may not be done. But this is a step, and when you talk about releasing pressure off of teachers, cutting their workload by 3, I think Pat said it best when we were talking last week. We just introduced topics now. We don't have time to master anything. This will allow students the opportunity to master skills as opposed to just getting introduced to them because there's so much on the plate. So I know that teachers, this will be a welcomed relief button, and truly give them time to do the things that are most important with students. But this to me is the most important work we're gonna do on this board. So I hope that we will continuously observe this, look at it, how can we make it better, how can we streamline it more to make sure that what we're doing in our classrooms is the most important skills we want to build. So whatever we say is important is what's going to get done.
Thank you, BJ.
Yep.
Pat?
So at what point in time did you get a final version?
We, as we shared, educator committee is wrapped up in April, and from there, it was really a matter of, compiling all of that feedback from all of the phases of the review process and engaging in several rounds of content and editorial review just to ensure that we got the cleanest, most cohesive and comprehensive version of the standards as possible. We were running into the middle to end of May before we were finalizing documents and making sure they were in shape for the board.
I don't doubt anything that's been said in the work. My problem's been, I got these Friday. And there's a lot. And to build on what Scott said, I thought we were going to cut a lot more out of K-1-2 so we could focus and have a better foundation of where kids are going to be, and we know what they're going to learn K-1-2 across the state of Indiana. The high school ones, I think, are outstanding. The middle school ones, I think, are outstanding. I'm just concerned that we didn't cut enough and get specific enough in K-1-2, what we want kids to know. And the process moved really fast from the board that's to approve it. And I'm confident my colleagues will approve this today. I will vote no, because I don't think we cut enough K-1-2. Because we have to be more prescriptive of what we want our kids to know as we make science of reading the most important thing and our most important initiative. We probably didn't dig deep enough K-1-2 to make certain that our expectations are these specific things will be mastered. Because in the kindergarten, when we say that with assistance an essential skill is going to happen, that means the kid hadn't mastered it yet. It means the kid's just getting introduced to it. And so I hope we revisit K-1-2 soon to be more prescriptive of what we want kids to know. And I look at it from the lens of an urban school superintendent whose kids are transient and move all the time. I still can't narrow down what those K-1-2 kids really, really know. And, we're gonna talk about assessment in a little bit, but I think it builds upon the fact that we need a through the school year assessment. We needed to cut. It's a start. So my other questions would be, when do we revisit them? Are we going to revisit all of them at once, or are we going to put them on a rotational schedule? And those decisions may not have been made yet, but I think moving forward, we have to have some better plan about how we're going to do this and how we roll it out.
Yeah, so Pat, thank you for your comments. 2 things. Number 1, we have a Science of Reading Advisory Board full of national experts who worked directly to build out the K-1-2 standards based on Science of Reading best practice, in addition to our teachers and parents. We also had math experts externally. Secondly, statute requires, and Chad, you're welcome to stand up and hit on this, statute requires the Department of Education to every 6 years review standards. So Chad, I don't know if you want to say anything beyond that.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add beyond that.
Why don't you come to the mic so people online can hear?
I don't have anything to add beyond that other than it's required that it's reviewed every 6 months, or every 6 years on a cyclical basis. but it's at least every 6 years, at least once every 6 years. So presumably, Mr. Mapes, to your point, I mean, if there are additional revisions or reviews that are required prior to that 6-year period coming up, we can certainly initiate process and procedures to get that done.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chad. Byron, I see your hand up.
Thank you so much. I want to just ditto what people have said because I agree with those things. So I always hate it when people repeat the same stuff, so I'm not going to do that. But I want to go one step further and say that the one thing I do want to repeat is I appreciate all the work that the department's done on this. The fidelity of that, I have no questions about. I appreciate the fact that when I asked for a red line copy, however many hours went into that, I got that, the day before yesterday or what have you. So I appreciate having that to look at. My concern still is, and I really have struggled with this vote. And some of my fellow board members know this because I've made some phone calls to have conversations about this, and I appreciate those. But my concern still continues to be, yes, we've made cuts. Yes, we've streamlined. I'm still worried about the fact, and I get the fact of what the law said about essential standards, and we have those and what have you. My concern still is, and in talking to educators, I know this to be fact, the concern still is we're still going to have a couple of different lists to work off of. We have the essential standards, and then we have these other standards that, oh, by the way, are important as well. And that still really bothers me, and I just think there was probably some ways that we could have taken some time to look at how do we work that out. And I know we're going to be able to do that in the process of looking at assessments, but I want educators to hear me loud and clear saying that, yes, we've streamlined, but I still don't want you to be operating off of, we've done the priority thing, we've done the check plus things in the past, we've done all that. Clearly, that stuff hasn't worked because our test scores certainly haven't shown that. And I know streamlining is going to help with that as well, but that's my concern at this point. I'm going to be like Pat, and you all know I will declare where I am on something. I'm going to be voting no. And again, it has nothing to do with your process, the fidelity of it, and the knowledge of the experts. It has to do that I'm still concerned, have we got where we need to be for teachers, and then ultimately students, and that's where my conscience gets me today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Byron, for your comments. And as a reminder to the board and the community watching, Indiana Code 2031-31 required us to reduce existing standards by at least 25%. We reduced by about a third. Is there more to reduce? Yes, potentially in the future, yes. I mean, this has to be iterative. Every time we learn, we should keep improving in education. The other thing you hit on, Byron, which I think is an important point, and a lot of those stakeholder conversations with educators and parents were about the layout and design of how we set this up, including the fact that by law, we had to define not more than 33% of standards essential. So I just wanted to point that out.
I
Yeah,
did
Erica.
want to, like Byron, I'm not going to reiterate what everyone said, but all the work that has gone into this has been, it's just so much. And there's no way any one of us on this board can come up with something better than what all the work that has gone into this has brought us today. And with that, I want to say I'm thankful because being a teacher, looking, not anymore, but looking
You're a
at all
director of
the-
special ed. Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Looking at all of the standards and then, finding myself, oh my goodness, we're running out on time. What are we going to hit on? What are we going to really hone in on? And what are we going to just really touch on and expose students to be able to have experts come together, stakeholders, all of these people come together and say, we're going to help you guys in this area and reduce and tell you what is a must. These are the things that you really have to take your time on and make sure students have that proper understanding. So while I agree, and I love what you said, moving from, let's not disregard what is good to get to what is perfect. It's gonna take time, and it's about taking steps. That's what I love about education. Education every year is more steps. I appreciate this step in the right direction. Actually, it's not just one step, it's multiple steps in the right direction. And can we get better? Absolutely, but I'm so glad we are taking the steps, and to be a part of that work is amazing.
Thank you, Erica. Greg?
As a practicing teacher of 30 years, I remember when these first came out years ago, decades ago, and it was overwhelming when they first hit, and then having student teachers, you try to explain to them what you have to cover can be overwhelming. So the fact that you're trusting us to teach what we need to teach, I love the reduction. We're micro-targeting what we need to teach in the classroom. And as I look at the government, and I taught U.S. history for a long time, but I teach AP government and dual credit through IU. These government standards are impressive. And this is what I teach for IU. So I love how in-depth it is, and you hit a lot of topics that are very, very important, and it just makes my job easier. And as a parent, when I go to look at what I want my child to learn, it's a lot easier for me to digest in subjects I don't know a lot about. So I really, really appreciate this, because I think it's going to help us attract teachers and feel more comfortable and confident in what we do in our profession. So thank you.
Thank you, Greg. This time, roll call, please.
Excuse me. Mr. Best.
Yes.
Ms. DeLosa.
Yes.
Mr. Durham.
Yes.
Dr. Ernest.
No.
Mr. Gastineau.
Yes.
Ms. Hemmel.
Yes.
Mr. Mapes.
No.
Ms. Moat.
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Renschler.
Yes.
Mr. Watts.
Yes.
Dr. Jenner.
Yes.
Motion passes 9-2. Thank you.
Thank you, board, and we'll proceed, our team will proceed actively to get going with next steps. So thank you to all the team and stakeholders again who participated. All right, at this time, we will, I'll invite Lynn Schemmel to come up. And I know I've iterated or reiterated this multiple times, but just a reminder to the general public, the board is going to openly talk about assessment redesign. I don't know what everyone's going to say, but one person on the board, including myself, we're all one vote. So please take this discussion for what it is, as an educated conversation about the assessment of the future. And remember, we are not making a decision today. This is just the start of the process. All right, Lynn?
All right, thank you and good morning. So how will we update iLearn to meet these needs and to measure the streamlined standards? Historically, the following year after operationalizing standards, a new assessment is administered with guidance. My presentation will share a current design model that's been designed with lots of input from multiple stakeholders. So why make changes to iLearn? There are a lot of factors. Our thinking around all of our assessments and the support needed started with the academic impact, in which we saw changes to the educational systems during that recent pandemic, which enhanced some deficiencies that we had prior to with student growth and various student populations. Continuous improvement supported by multiple stakeholder input is always at the center of the work to enhance student, teacher, and family experiences and meet their needs. Currently, assessments are in a state of change with legislation, streamlined standards, and vendor updates. Legislation brought academic standard streamlining and the request for assessment redesign. As we redesign the assessment, we need to be thoughtful about other requirements and uses of test scores to ensure that those aspects are incorporated into the system. Requirements may expose external threats, so we want to maintain test security and integrity to ensure that we are administering valid and reliable assessments. Jake discussed two components of the new Indiana Code, the key skills and straight studies and the standards work. The third component of the legislation is a realignment of the iLearn assessment. As we think about the redesign and the realignment of iLearn, it's given us the opportunity to reflect on what's happening with innovation and assessments. In Indiana and across other states, enhancements to accessibility tools, universal design, and accommodations and protocols have been implemented. We've made great strides to provide as many students as possible an adaptive assessment and the support tools that they use in daily instruction. Technology has been incorporated from the mode of testing to universal tools to item types and functionality. However, until recently, the overall test design with an end-of-year summative has not evolved as the other areas have. So how do we plan to innovate and meet our goals? A through-year system of assessments can be administered. Throughout the year, schools will give a series of interims or checkpoint assessments. Each checkpoint or interim will reflect standards that are taught at that particular point of time in the year. The Office of Student Assessment recently sent out a survey to districts and non-public schools to gather input about their implementation of learning progressions of standards throughout the year for both math and ELA. Almost 80% of corporations and non-public schools responded to that survey, with multiple others responding to us that they would wait for the outcomes and then make their changes. The results of that survey have informed the development of draft blueprints for standards to include in each of the checkpoints. The checkpoints will contribute to student performance in reporting categories, but not the overall scale score. The final summative will be used to generate the student scale score just as it is now. I'm gonna go a little deep. Go ahead.
Yeah, BJ, go ahead.
Is that fourth one, the summative, is that an additional test, or is there a summative created from those 3 checkpoints?
It's an additional test. I'll go into a little bit of that. If I can go, that's fine. I want to go a little bit deep because of lots of questions that we've got as we've thrown out this model for feedback. The checkpoints will have an open window, flexible scheduling based on the local scope and sequence and curriculum maps. The specific timeframes are yet to be determined, but for example, the first checkpoint could be open August to October, during which School A is ready to administer that checkpoint in maybe mid-September, while School B isn't ready until early October. Each checkpoint will be approximately a 3-month window, similar to a fall, winter, and spring model, and then followed by that summative. Each checkpoint will have the option for a Form B to be administered to those students who, after their performance on Form A, that initial assessment, need to receive additional remediation and intervention. So then they could take that Form B, improve their scores, hopefully, and then that information then would be used to help feed the reported category scores at the end of the year.
So can you pause on that? We talk a lot as a board, and Scott, you talk about it a lot, competency mastery. And I've heard Greg and Kristen even talk in terms of teachers. We have students who are mastering content at different points in time. And so I want to make sure I'm clear. A school could determine within a window, you mentioned the August to October as an example, of when they provide that first checkpoint. Let's say I'm a teacher, I have 20 kids, and 12 kids are good to go, but 8 struggle a little bit. So I could remediate those children, provide interventions, tutoring, et cetera, and then I could do a Form B to do another checkpoint for those children.
That's correct.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I'm clear. Thank you.
Yep, and they're...
Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, and also, just to clarify, because this is where people get nervous, and that is that these checkpoints are local. It's a common test, but it's local results only. In other words, this isn't a high-stakes test for the teacher, the school, or the student. This is an informative test so that the teacher can get, I'm assuming, very, very quick feedback and go, oh, to Dr. Jenner's point, I've got eight students who struggled, I'm gonna do an intervention with them, but that information is not getting fed back where someone says, oh my gosh, school A failed the first checkpoint and school B did great on the first checkpoint. That I think it's important for trust that these checkpoints are local and it's informative for the school, because there's a whole year. Now the summative, sure, we get that, but that local, those checkpoints, and again, I'm asking, I should ask the question, is that the case?
That's correct. So the outcomes of each individual checkpoint will feed into reporting category information. So both all students, parents, and educators will know where students currently are and how they're improving and growing throughout the year for then that final determination at the end. The only information that's going into that scale score would be the summative, as it is now.
And Lynn, already today we've heard a through-the-year assessment model mentioned. How many other states right now have a through-the-year approximately?
There are 13, and I'll talk about that.
Oh, that's coming.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep.
The reason I mention that is because one of those states that you're probably going to be talking about, I've spoken with their state chief who just released amazing scores in the area of reading. And while the scores weren't publicly published, they really specifically as a team looked at those checkpoints to triage with resources and supports. So we could do that, again, if we're seeing a school corporation or school really struggle, rather than waiting for the school's phone call to say, I need some help, which we have, we would be able to see that data as well. So
That sounds a lot like my formative assessment, but isn't approved by the department, but it does approve the year assessment, and we try to build skills up for kids and move on. Obviously, I love that. That's how we help kids. I mean, what we currently do is just kind of an autopsy, and it's too late, and those kids move on to the next grade level or change schools or wherever. But to be able to attack this early, and I would ask that because some of us start school in July, that maybe we even, as we design this, look to be able to open it
open the window earlier.
Yeah. Because the earlier we know where they're at,
Yeah.
the more resources we can get to them to make certain to grow.
Thank
Lynn,
you.
sorry, we're
all right.
already ready to discuss.
Awesome.
Can you tell?
I love it. So to give you an idea, each checkpoint would contain about 20 to 25 items based on 4 to 6 standards, and that's going to be determined by the blueprints, which we're bringing in educators next week. Those checkpoints, again, they provide data on subdomains of the reporting categories, which will populate overall domain or reporting category information in addition to that summative scale score that comes out at the end of the school year. There will also be a predictive model built into the system to provide data if a student is currently at risk, on track, or achieving mastery on current instruction and for the summative. So similar to what we've been doing for opt-in grade 2 for iRead 3, a similar.
Lynn?
Yes.
Take a breath real quick. BJ whispered a question to me, and probably others might have it, so go ahead and ask that.
So you said 20 to 25 questions, 4 to 6 standards per
Checkpoint.
mini assessment, lack of a better term. Are we going to provide a pacing guide so schools understand what it is we're going to assess in that first one? So we want you to cover 7.1.3, 7.1.6, and so on, so they know what that assessment coming up is.
So we'll provide the blueprints, and again, I want to emphasize those blueprints were drafted based on 80% of the feedback, from across the state, based on that scope and sequence
Huge
of the learning
return rate.
progression. Yep.
But to BJ's point, you're calling it blueprints, you're saying pacing guides.
sorry.
But for
That's
for the general public, the pacing would be determined locally by how quickly the students are mastering content. And so that would be within the window.
Correct.
The blueprints would provide those specific standards, and locally you would determine if you wanted a pacing guide or, yes, okay, got it.
So the blueprints will lay out what standards are in checkpoint 1, 2,
Yes.
3. So.
Yep.
Oh, Byron, see your hand up.
So this is wonderful, and I'm thinking back to the days of would have been like 2009 through whatever, and for the life of me, I cannot remember the name of the formative assessment we had at that time.
Acuity.
Yeah,
Who
thank
else
you.
remembers that?
I loved Acuity because as a person who was a principal of a turnaround school at the time, we were within 1 or 2 points of where we thought we were going to be. It was so formative, so predictive for us that I loved that. So I absolutely love this. And as you know, we took that school off the F list. I have to throw that in there with that. So this is great stuff. The question is, to what BJ and Katie were just talking about, is there any way or any thought, and I love the pacing guide, I'm back to worrying about Pat's situation or any school that starts late, ends late, whatever. Is there any way on something like this that the school could literally choose where it forces you to have included all the standards at some point, but I don't have to be doing the same pacing that everybody else is? Am I making sense with that? Could there be some individuality to the school on when those standards are done in the checkpoints? Hopefully I'm making sense with that question.
Can I restate it back to you just to make sure we answer correctly, Byron? Are you saying if we, as a department with stakeholders, build out the blueprints, which will inform schools, here are key standards that are foundational for each checkpoint, and then the pacing is determined locally within a 3-month window, let's say, are you asking, Byron, if the blueprints could be flexible, so like competencies could be mastered at varying, not only paces, but at varying checkpoints? I just want to make sure I'm tracking on your question so we can answer it.
Yeah, I think we're close on this, but let's say BJ schools and Pat schools were not exactly on the same schedule, and I get the fact if you have a 3-month window that probably helps with that, but could I locally determine what 4 standards, for example, might be driving the 25 questions?
That won't.
Instead of that being selected for me, I determine as a school what 4 standards get in that particularly formative window. Sorry if I'm making this, I'm just thinking about, we do have schools on so many different kinds of schedules, is how do you make that flexible to where we could actually at the local level choose which standards are being covered at that time formatively? And if that makes it too ambiguous, I certainly understand.
I love giving freedom. I hate big government. I love as much freedom we can give. The only thing that would scare me with something like this is we have a lot of transient students that may be in the EVSC one grading period. They may be in Boonville or Mount Vernon or Warwick the next. Boonville and Warwick are the same, sorry. But that's my, Byron, I love where your head was headed with, can we just tell them, hey, get here, don't care how you get here? But that would be my fear, is we have a lot of kids that are in our district one semester or one grading period, gone for one and then back another one. So I would want some kind of parameters as to what we're teaching when, so those kids are getting that.
Mm-hmm. We will need to ensure, as we design the blueprints, that all the standards are represented. We do have some federal regulations that we need to achieve, as far as making sure that we've assessed the depth and the breadth at the end of the school year. We'll need to look at some policy around those move-in students. So if you have a move-in student who wasn't here during checkpoint 1, what can we do then to still feed that information so that there's still information at the end of the school year, but also some immediate information for everyone as well.
Are any of the standards hit in all the checkpoints, or is it all new standards for each checkpoint?
Each checkpoint will have different standards on them, and some of the standards will not appear until the summative, and it's just based on their culminating standards that occur at the end of the, that the work on those standards, that opportunity to learn, takes longer and will be at the end of the year.
I think, and again, this may be way too deep, but I really appreciate BJ, and I know Pat, you had the thing on the transient students, and this gets back, Dr. Jenner, what you said about, it's local results, But if the state has it, if you have a student that moves 9 weeks, 10 weeks into the school year, to be able to get the results of that checkpoint, that gives you information way more than their report card or whatever. You can actually see where they are on certain skills.
That'd be great.
And
Yeah.
I think that would be incredibly helpful
That
to
would be
schools.
Absolutely.
So Lynn, I think we honestly could keep going with some
Yeah.
good discussion. And you might be covering some of the points. So why don't you continue on and, board, if we could just kind of jot our questions down. If you have something exactly to the slide, absolutely raise your hand. But I know you have several more slides, so go ahead, Lynn.
Okay, thank you. The summative assessment will be shorter due to standards being assessed on those different checkpoints and that ability to populate those domains throughout the year. The summative will contain items on all essential standards, standards which may not have been assessed on the checkpoints because they're culminating standards, and then a sampling of others, again, to make sure that we've assessed the depth and the breadth as we're required to do. Our implementation model will be to pilot the checkpoints in 2024-2025. The current summative would continue to be administered again with guidance to educators. That piloting year would be an opt-in, so we're hoping that a lot of schools want to help us pilot this new system, and then the overall system would be operationalized in 2025-2026 with the 3 checkpoints and the shortened summative. This is only math and ELA. Science and social studies will still have the summative at the end of the school year. I want to talk about a couple goals of our iLearn redesign. The first one is to improve the quality and usefulness of state assessment systems through innovation. And we want to achieve that by providing actionable data for educators and families. We want to shorten that summative assessment. We want to connect teachers directly to instructional supports for students, so we're exploring artificial intelligence opportunities. We want to provide end-of-the-year reports that consider student performance throughout the entire year. We want to reduce testing overall by incorporating required data points into a single system, and I'll expand on that later. And then we want to provide quality professional development for assessment, instruction, and data literacy. The second goal is to provide actionable data for educators and families. To do that, we want to provide a dynamic reporting system for educators. We want to build a family portal that explains results and connects families to relevant support materials. Again, we want to provide year-round information, through the year for instructional response. We want to highlight those learning progressions that are happening through the local scope and sequence, and provide information on the mastery of standards at the time of learning. We want to provide 100% alignment with these interims, these checkpoints to the Indiana academic standards, and then predict performance on the summative assessment. And then promote relaxed testing and additional learning experiences through the second chance assessment. So Dr. Jenner asked about other states. So Indiana is not alone in this work. We have several advisory, thought, and implementation partners in this work. We have our technical advisory committee. We have state assessment advisory groups that are comprised of Indiana educators. We have focus group. We have educator committees with us throughout every stage of the process. Cambium, Smarter Balanced, Education First, and then the other states that are highlighted on the screen. Currently, there are 13 states that are at different stages in through-year implementation. Most of the models fall into 2 categories. The first one is that they have the same blueprint. So they give the same type of checkpoint or interim across the year. So when those interims are administered, students may or may not have had that opportunity to learn. The second type is unit modules. So for example, these modules may be provided on statewide curriculum resources. So at some point in time, there's a geometry module present. So everybody takes that. Or maybe there's a measurement or data module. Indiana at this time is the only state who's using a learning progression model, a natural focus progression of the learning standards, instruction, again, based on that scope and sequence provided by corporations.
And that was designed based on what we've learned from other states through that research.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing, you just mentioned vendors. I mentioned a vendor. Byron mentioned a vendor. I need to say, so that none of them are eliminated, in no way are we endorsing any of these vendors as the selected vendor for this. So I just needed to say that. I feel like ethically, Chad, I didn't want to mess that up. Anyway, keep going.
Earlier I mentioned the needs stemming from academic impact and recovery. So just to give you a quick glance, these are some things that you've heard about at these meetings. This innovative approach has evolved from initial data provided from the assessments to providing information regarding the standards and essential need of support, or SENS, as we've called them, to our centralized reporting system for educators. Now we're moving to checkpoints to provide data on the subdomains, which are comprised of specific standards, and that opportunity for a retake if necessary that will be used in the final reporting, and then enhancing reporting for educators and parents with immediate data to inform next steps. So where are we at in the development of this redesign? You know, I mentioned that we've received the data regarding learning progression. From that learning progression data, we've drafted blueprints with input from our team, our technical advisors, and Indiana educator groups, which will be reviewed and revised by educator committees next week, and then reviewed again for input from our psychometrics team. Also next week, we'll work with our technical advisory committee to review scoring and reporting structures to connect our checkpoints and summative data that I've mentioned. We want to provide data tied to resources for educators and families meeting existing needs and uses with this system of assessments, such as information for flexible small groups and norm reference scores for high ability identification. Again, input on what is needed in the system has been provided with educator input. As for impact on the formative assessment process, the current process remains in place based on funding through the 2025-2026 school year. After the initial operational year, formative grant funds would continue to be provided, again, based on funding for grades outside of grades 3 through 8, so for grades K2 and 9-10, as well as the dyslexia screeners. Remaining funds that could be utilized, locally if desired, for students who are in additional need of monitoring. Again, as I've mentioned earlier, we've had various advisory groups, throughout this design process, and formative assessment data is one that's been brought up by schools, how they use that data for various purposes, again, for their small groups, or high ability identification to get that norm reference achievement score. So we want to make sure that those uses are built into this redesign as we focus on reduced testing overall and enhanced reporting. So thank you for the opportunity to share how the iLearn redesign and realignment is following behind the standards implementation work.
So now we'll open it up for any further questions and discussions. I'd be glad to kick off one question. We talk a lot about early literacy, and I know we're focusing in on the through-year assessment being grades 3 through 8. Have any of the other states attempted a through-year assessment for early literacy below grade level 3?
I don't know specifically about through year. I know there are other literacy assessments.
Yeah, there are other literacy. I would just be curious to know, one of the indicators that the board affirmed is the early literacy, I don't think we called it the early literacy assessment, the early literacy indicator. So that's just, again, I'm just thinking out loud, is that a way, again, to further support and understand the foundations? So what are the questions?
Just
thoughts?
a comment. This is one of the most exciting things to me that we've done in a really long time. I think we've all begged for throughout the year assessment that truly has immediate impact and value. That's not what, most of the tests that we give as a state don't have that. I know Byron, and again, I don't want to use vendor names, but we talked about acuity. When I was in the classroom, everything I did was driven by that. This will be an example of that. I'll be very honest. ISTEP data at the time, wasn't real important to me as a teacher. So this will give us immediate stuff that we can go in and kind of see where our holes are and fill those in before the students leave our classroom. So this is really, really exciting to me.
Thank you, BJ. Erica.
I have a comment as well. I'm glad we're looking to assessments, and throughout the years we've gone over assessments and results and things like that. And we've noticed that Black and brown children definitely have not performed as well historically on some of these assessments. And I'm hoping that as we look to the future, that we are considering including more stakeholders in even creating these assessments. I think about the teenagers that I work with, even my own teenage children. They've adopted a culture that seems so foreign to me, when it comes to phones and electronics and things that they use, and the terminology and things that they are accustomed to because of the culture that they've developed that's kind of out of my time. And when I looked at some of these assessments, there are some things that are hard to relate to for children of color. And because of that, it's like it's hard to focus sometimes, and you kind of check out when it's something that it's just hard to relate. I think about my dad, who was a fisherman, but I never went fishing a day in my life. And he would talk about fishing, and I'm like, I'm checked out. I don't know what you're talking about, because it really didn't matter much to me. So when it seems to associate with our lives, we can connect better. And then you get to actually see, what our kids know. So I'm glad that in these stakeholder discussions we're having, we're including students. They know, a lot of things, and they can tell us what they connect with, and I hope that we're including and more inclusive of students of color and families of color when it comes to us selecting vendors and things like that in the future.
Thank you, Erica. Scott?
Yeah, just brief, and again, I know that we're early in the process, there's a ton to go on, but I think, you mentioned obviously the formative at the end, really focused on the essential standards with a sampling of others. My hope is that sampling is a very, very light sampling, because if it's not, then you're back to, well, I gotta cover them all because it's gonna be on the test, and I got kids who didn't pass the test, and now I've got problems. And I think if the essential standards are the essential standards, let's really zero on in. I get, there are reasons why we have to do some sampling, I completely get that, but if we can do the minimal sampling of those other standards, and really just focus on the essential skills. And again, I know we're early in the process and you guys have already thought of all that, but just want to put that out there.
Great, thank you, Scott. Anyone online? I don't want to jump ahead if you have anything. Yes, Pat.
I would just add, I know we're looking at proficiency, but we always want to look at growth. We don't want to lose a conversation of how we're growing our kids, because they all come in at different levels, even though it might be, I'm a fourth grader, but my skill level may not be there yet. So we can make certain to look at the work that our teachers are doing and reward that and recognize that as we measure growth and proficiency.
Thank you. Lynn, thank you very much.
Sure.
It sounds like the blueprints and the TAC will all kick off next week and the week after. We'll be certain to keep the board updated as the process continues. Scott mentioned we're early in the process. That is true. But as you could see with the standards alignment, time flies when you're having fun. So it's gonna move. So we'll keep you all posted. All right, thank you, Lynn. The final thing we have today on new business, and the final thing for the meeting, is the resolution. So I'll have Jason come up. This resolution for the general public is basically just signaling how all of the pieces and parts are connecting together. We have a lot of balls going down the court. I opened with that today. So this is the connection point. So Jason, if you could read the resolution and provide any commentary, and then we'll ask for a vote.
Good morning. As Dr. Jenner stated, this resolution that I present today, resolution regarding the prioritization of student learning, is truly intended to be a signal that the work that we have accomplished, the work we're accomplishing, and the work to be accomplished in this space is part of a cohesive vision of change. So I'm going to read it, and then we can talk through. Whereas during the 2021-2022 legislative session, the legislature passed House Enrolled Act 1251, which directed the Indiana State Board of Education to identify key skills and traits necessary for students to be successful upon completion of high school. Whereas Indiana Code 20-31-3-1 further directed the board and the Indiana Department of Education to conduct a study to define essential skills and traits that promote meaningful employment, post-secondary enrollment, or enlistment leading to service by high school graduates. Whereas the study informed a prioritization and streamlining of academic standards to align with the identified skills and traits needed for success while maintaining a rigorous learning environment. Whereas during the 2022-2023 legislative session, the legislature passed House Enrolled Act 1002, which directs the board and the department to put forward new high school diploma requirements that are more flexible and relevant to students that reflect essential skills and traits needed for success. Whereas the rethinking of high school diploma requirements includes the reframing of required courses and course sequencing to allow for further or greater flexibility and relevance to students' unique path. Whereas the rethinking of high school diploma requirements also includes the intentional incorporation of work-based learning experiences and the earning of high-value credentials that reflect and represent a student's chosen learning pathway and the essential skills and traits needed for success. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the board affirms the prioritization and streamlining of Indiana's academic standards to focus on the essential knowledge and skills needed for student success while maintaining a rigorous learning environment. It is further resolved that the board affirms a rigorous learning environment should be learner-centric and future-focused, allowing for multiple means of delivering instruction and demonstrating competency of learning standards representing the essential knowledge and skills. Be it further resolved that the board shall promote a K-12 system that prepares every student with the essential knowledge, skills, and traits needed for lifelong success while providing transparent, seamless transitions to meaningful employment, post-secondary enrollment, or enlistment leading to service. This resolution is hereby adopted by the Indiana State Board of Education on this 7th day of June 2023.
Once we approve it.
Yes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.